Let's see how this SOKL for loop works. First, this SOKL gets runs and it maintains all the resulted records inside some kind of cache with the query locator ID. Let's take an example where we have 450 records. So it puts all 450 records inside something called as a cache. Now it uses SOAP API calls like query and query more to fetch records in batches of 200. First, it uses the query SOAP API with batch size 200. This query SOAP API call fetches first 200 records and it handed over these 200 records to this SOKL for loop to process. Please also note that along with 200 records, it also got the done boolean variable as value as false to indicate this query is not done yet. Also, it got the query locator ID -200 to indicate to use this to fetch next 200 records. So now this SOKL for loop has 200 records to process. This SOKL for loop with this kind of syntax, it processes these 200 records one by one like this. It takes all the records one by one and so on. It processes till it reaches to the 200 record. Once it reaches to the 200 records, it is done with processing of first batch. Now internally it knows that it is not yet done with all the records by using this flag. Internally it uses the query more SOAP API call with batch size as 200 by sending the query locator ID which it got it from the earlier call. And now this query more will fetch the next 200 records and these next 200 records has handed over to the SOKL for loop. So now this SOKL for loop processes this next 200 records one by one and so on till it reaches to the 200th record. Once it is done with the processing of this next batch 200 records, it checks for the done flag. It is not yet done. That means the records are still there. So it makes one more query more with the query locator ID as -400 with the same batch size 200. But this time we have only 50 records remaining. So it returns those 50 records to the SOKL for loop. Now this SOKL for loop processes these 50 records one by one and so on till it reaches to the 50th record of this batch. Now by using the done flag, it is true. So it comes to know that it processed all the records of this query and hence the execution of this SOKL for loop gets ended. For more details, please watch this full video on our channel.